Hello everyone, my name is Shivam Raj and you are watching me on Study Capital YouTube platform, and I'm your new mentor, and I'll be talking today about the English NET syllabus and the various details and nuances of the syllabus and how one can go about it. So this is basically there are 10 units in the syllabus, and earlier, before the change in the syllabus that happened in 2018, the categorizations that were there in the syllabus, they were based on ages. So the romantic age, the new classical age, these were the broad generalizations that were present before 2018. Since 2018 there has been a revision in the syllabus, and now the syllabus is sort of categorized or divided into the various literary forms or genres that we have. So drama, poetry, these are the various genres of literature. So these are the various units. So unit number 1 is drama, and before I go into that, I'd like to tell you the basics for anyone who is preparing for the first time. There are going to be 150 questions, out of which the first 50 questions are going to be from paper 1, which is your general paper which every student has to take regardless of their subject, and paper number 2, which is your domain, your subject, which is in our case is going to be English. So there are 10 units in paper 2, which all of them combined comprise of 100 questions, and 50 questions are from paper 1. So in total there are 150 questions. Each question amounts for 2 marks. So there are 150 into 300 marks paper, and out of which 100 questions or 200 marks are from your paper, which is English in our case. And to anyone uninitiated, there are no negative marking. So you'll be awarded 2 marks for each correct question, and you won't be deducted any marks for any wrong questions. Now I'll be deep diving into the various aspects and various units of our paper. So as I told you before, the earlier the categorizations before 2018, those units were divided on the basis of the ages. So the classical age, romantic age, neoclassical age, Victorian age. So these were the broad classifications. Post 2018, there have been revisions in the syllabus, not major ones. Usually even in subsequent revisions that you will see in the coming years, there won't be much change, because you have to study everything from the classical age to the most recent years, to the last year, the books released in the last years. So nothing much changes, but the categorizations change. So now the divisions are based on the various genres of the literature. So right off the bat you can see this is the first unit, which is drama. Now under drama, I must clarify you, everything under the sun comes under drama, which belongs to the particular genre of dramas. I mean to say that various countries that you can think of, any country you can think of, be it Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, or the British, which is the core. So that you have to study, that you study in your particular in your universities. But in NET you are not just circumscribed to the British drama, but you have to study Indian drama, you have to study Australian drama, you have to study even Sanskrit texts and Hindi dramas, Hindi plays. So everything under the sun comes under drama. Anything which you can call a drama is going to be asked in the NET syllabus. So classical Greek drama in the English genealogy of things. We start with classical Greek dramas, so Sophocles, your Aeschylus, your Aristophanes. So their works, you have to study Sophocles, let's say Oedipus Rex. You might have studied in your university, at your university level, but you have to, but you'll now need to know everything about Sophocles in each and every play that he has written, at least the summary. You don't need to even read the whole text, but you need to have a general idea what the play is about. So what Oedipus Rex is about, or what the Electra is about, you need to know that. And apart from major writers like Sophocles that you might have heard about, you need to learn about some other writers which are not usually prescribed at the university level in major universities. So writers like Aristophanes, you may have heard of him, you may have even read a play about him, but you now need to know the various plays that he has written and the ages and the quality of those plays. What are the characteristics, and especially the story, and also the characters and major plot points. Nothing too serious and nothing too in too detail, but you need to then know the basic points. and have a basic idea of all the plays that is written. So Oedipus Rex, and then Elizabethan drama. Then this is the general sort of categorization or genealogy that you study in your literature book, be it Edward Albert or Routledge or whatever book you study from. So nothing special, nothing new. I'm just reacquainting you with whatever you already read. We'll just go a little deeper into, and not just deeper, we'll also go a little wider. So what's peculiar and special to NET is that at your university level you study only a handful of texts, and you study them very deeply, and you need to learn everything about them, and you need to cultivate the art of writing, how to answer text and how to structure your arguments. But in NET you need to cover a lot more area. You need to study from Australian literature, New Zealand literature, South African literature, Caribbean literature, and anything you can think of, in China, Japan, Singapore, anything you can think of. They have asked questions. I can show you questions from previous year questions. They've asked from Malaysia even. So you need to study everything. So how are you going to achieve that? You can't just depend on your texts, and you can't afford to read everything into detail and read the text. So you need to learn or get into the habit of reading summaries and actually keeping basic plot points of what happens in the story. So this is nothing new. This is the special, nothing special. This is the British core history. So Elizabethan drama, your Restoration drama, modern drama. I'll also be reacquainting you with what you've already studied. Like what's the difference between Elizabethan drama and the Restoration drama? What was the general background of the age? And modern drama, how let's say T.S. Eliot comes in and Ezra Pound and all those things. But we'll also study from other countries. So this is Unit 1 drama. I've only mentioned the English part, but I'm assuring you that questions from even Sanskrit texts, and from Tamil texts, and any language you can think of, they are going to ask you. Now this is Unit 2 poetry. Again, find a book, find a dictionary, look up poetry, and anything that subscribes to that definition in any language whatsoever, written any period of time, NET is going to ask you. So don't limit yourself to the British core history or the American poetry. Anything which subscribe to the definition given in OED, Oxford English Dictionary, they're going to ask you. So Renaissance poetry, metaphysical poetry, John Donne and people, romantic poetry, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, modern poetry, Plath, T.S. Eliot. So T.S. Eliot is, sort of straddles both the American and the English literary tradition. So, but Sylvia Plath from the American, entirely American. So you're going to be seeing this is just for example. So British and American, but you're going to be asked from Indian, American, Caribbean, as I've already mentioned. Anything which subscribes to the definition of poetry, you're going to be asked that, and you need to know that. So this is Unit 3, fiction and short story. So again, as you can see, as you can guess from this from the title, and by the way, this is not something that I've paraphrased or written of my own. This unit is from the NET syllabus that UGC have provided. So this is how vague they are, or how, let's say, broad they are. So anything which can fit into the definition of fiction or short story is going to be here. So in fiction, if you take out short story, because they've already specifically mentioned short story, what remains? It remains, let's say, novel, or basically novels, yeah. So you're going to be asked questions from novels, various novels. Again, I'm stressing this point because students are not taught novels from countries other than India, America, and Britain. So I'm again stressing this point. Novel, it could be from any country, any writer. So this is important. That's why I'm stressing this point in all of these units. So anything which is fiction, you're going to be asked from that. So what consists of fiction? So that's first of all novels. So novels of could be anyone. I have written the major ones like Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, George Eliot. So apart from learning about the plot points and the characters and the major incidents, you'll also need to keep in mind the themes and narrative techniques that happen. So like point of view. So also the everything that consists of the narrative and the how you look at things. So these techniques and these cultural contexts, what happens in Vanity Fair. So what is the cultural background? Why these things are mentioned? Why Great Exhibition is mentioned? So you need to learn about these historical facts also. Then same thing, Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway, James Ulysses. So you need to learn, you'll need to learn that what different techniques are used in Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway, James Joyce, Ulysses. One of the major techniques that you would already know about is the stream of consciousness, but this is very surface level and basic. Everybody would know that. You need to go in a little deeper. You need to learn about intertextuality and the specific characteristics of a modern work. So I'll also be talking about how to identify the markers of identifying a modern piece of art. It could be anything, any art. It could be a novel, it could be a painting, it could be an architecture. So there are certain markers that you can identify a work with. So need to learn what are the literary markers. So one of them is allusions. So even the first line of Ulysses, when you read, it's a harking back to another time, and it's a harking back to parts of Christianity and those sorts of things. So you'll need to identify those things, because you're not going to be asked questions only like who wrote Ulysses. You'll also be asked questions from chronology. You'll also be asked questions from sort of paragraphs based questions, where you need to identify some characteristics of the age or of the work or of the literary method used, those sorts of things. And then the short stories. So I'll talk about these writers in brief, but I'll also like to, if I get the time, I'd like to go into a little detail and discuss some of the major short stories of, let's say, of Henry or Catherine Mansfield, and what's the writer of, I can't remember his name, but this very famous writer, Jewish writer, I'll tell you the name. So basically the canonical text of which subscribe to the notion of short stories. So I didn't go into those. Okay, now non-fictional prose. Again, anything which is non-fictional, regardless of the country that it originates from, you're going to be asked from that. But since the canvas is so broad, when you say non-fictional prose, we have to limit, somehow circumscribe all of this mess. So we'll talk of the canonical writers, the canonical texts, like Francis Bacon of Studies, Charles Lamb, Essays of Elia, and these are not necessarily non-fictional, but we'll also go into, let's say, Shooting an Elephant, or more sort of non-fictional realm is My Experiments Truth, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, and famous speeches. So anything which is non-fictional, or you can go into Swati Chaturvedi or Alchemy of Truth, these sorts of essays, and Braj Kachuru. So these writers and their essays. Moving on. So this is language, basic concepts, theories, and pedagogy. So here we talk about linguistics. So the major component of this is linguistics. So we'll be talking about phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics. So this is the basic linguistics that you study at the UG level. Then there are some language acquisition theories, which many of which are taught at the MA level. So we'll talk about those language acquisition theories, and then there are language teaching methodologies. So yeah, so basically this is a very sort of overlooked unit. Most people don't pay attention to these units, and especially students who go by themselves, who study from let's say literary history of literature sort of books like Routledge, and do Wikipedia searches. They tend to miss on these units, and there are always one or two questions from these units, and they are always overlooked. So I'm going to be paying special attention to this unit, and there are a couple of more units like this which go under the radar, so that students who study from us don't miss out on these questions. And you don't have to work too much on these units. You can cover these in 2 or 3 days, and I can guarantee you there are going to be 1 or 2 questions from these units, which other students might miss, but I promise you I'll be covering these. Okay, then this is English in India, History, Evolution, and Futures. So how the English language was sort of circulated within India, and how we study English, and how the English literary studies emerged in India. So there's a contention by many people that English literary studies actually began in India, and so we're going to study and examine how investigate if that's true, and we're going to be reading some seminal essays, as I mentioned, Swati Joshi, Braj Kachru, Alchemy of English, and also you need to know these names, and I'll give you a whole list of these names with their essays and their major arguments. So you'll need to be acquainted with these essays also, and we'll chart the whole trajectory, how the colonial period post independence and how contemporary India, how we can situate the study of English literature in India. And also you'll also be reading about these developments in paper 1. So when you read about the whole trajectory of, let's say, Macaulay's Minute, and then read about Wood's Dispatch, so you'll already be reading all of these things. I'll go just deeper into it and give you some essays and talk about the major arguments. Okay, now this is cultural studies, which now I believe is the most I'm going to be giving you a value judgment, which I personally believe is the easiest of the whole unit. You can cover it in, I think, 1 month, and if you give 6-7 hours a day for a month, I don't think you're going to have a strike rate of less than 95%. You're going to score upwards of 90% easily if you study for considerable length of amount of time every day for about a month. It's a stretch, but you could get 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 of these questions. These are because you don't have to read text. For example, you've read Mrs. Dalloway, you've read Ulysses, if you read Finnegan's Wake, you spent almost about 15-20 days in a text, and then they may ask you a question from, let's say, Finnegan's Wake or Mrs. Dalloway. So the chances of you getting a question from the thing that you've studied for 15 to 20 days is, astronomically low. Whereas if you study cultural studies, the whole cultural studies is going to be finished in about a month, and there are always about 10 questions or 7-8 questions from cultural studies. Even more if you because the boundaries of cultural studies and literary criticism and literary theory is so porous, it's hard to make categorizations, but there's going to be a major chunk of questions from cultural studies, literary theory and literary criticism, which you can easily solve, not very tough. So I'll be talking about how the entire cultural studies came into being. So it has very close ties with Marxism. So we'll also be talking about Marxism and all the major isms, feminism, post-structuralism, structuralism, deconstruction, everything. And then we'll swiftly drift into cultural studies part. So we'll talk about how the Frankfurt School came into being and how people were driven out from, let's say, Germany, and they went to Columbia, and how the BCCC was formed. Raymond Williams, Stuart Hall, Richard Hogarth. These are the seminal figures. I think you might already be familiar with these names, but I'll go into detail and I'll list out all the work they've done. You'll need to remember them chronologically and with date, because if you've attempted any of the previous year questions, you might be familiar that how heavy UGC leans on the dates. So we'll go into detail, and we'll cover important topics from popular culture, media culture, subcultures, and we'll also talk about major figures associated with subculture or popular culture. So Andrew Ross or figures like those, we'll also talk about them. And social power dynamics, this is more sort of a theoretical approach. We'll also be deep diving into the theoretical part, but for most part we'll be focusing on the questions that have been asked in previous years. So chronology based questions, questions from so what happens, I'll tell you, I'll talk to you for a couple of minutes. What happens is that there are two ways of going about it. The first is they ask you questions from major writers, and what they do is, when they ask major writers, they usually ask their minor works, so obscure works of major writers. This is the first approach. This is approach number one: major writers, obscure works. Number two is then minor writers and their major works. So when you study cultural studies, we'll be talking about some major writers. So major writers will be your writers like Raymond Williams, Stuart Hall. So I think you'd already know about the major works of, let's say, Raymond Williams or Stuart Hall. So what I'd do is I'd go into their obscure works, and if I talk about the major works, I'll talk about something which is not just on the surface but also a little deeper and dates and how it connects from other works and how it came about. So these sort of little anecdotes. And then I'll also go into some minor writers, like writers from subculture, let's say, which are not very popular, which are not taught at university level, which are not given in many of the books that you study for net preparation. So I'll also go into those writers and their major works. So we'll cover everything from top to bottom in cultural studies. Now, literary criticism. So we'll start with literary theory, literary criticism, and then we'll go into culture studies. So literary criticism, we'll talk about classical criticism, modern criticism, contemporary theories. We'll go into very detailed description of all of these. So we'll talk about Matthew Arnold, new criticism, T.S. Eliot, contemporary also Roland Barthes. These are some of the selections. We'll study at a much broader canvas and go much deeper. Okay, now literary theory post World War II. Again, this title is given by UGC. So though it says literary theory post World War II, but I can guarantee you they'll ask you questions pre World War II also. And even if they don't, you need to know the theories before post World War II, so to sort of track the whole genealogy or the trajectory of the movement and how each subsequent movement came about because of the previous movement. For example, post World War II, we'll talk about cultural studies and feminism and post structuralism, but we'll also need to talk about, let's say, practical criticism, because each subsequent movement is sort of dictated and decided by the previous movement. For example, I told you how cultural studies emerged because of some of the Marxist leanings. So we'll have to talk about Marxism. So we'll do that, but sticking to the slide, we'll have to talk about literary theory post World War II. So structuralism, post structuralism, obvious ones: psychoanalytic theory, Lacan; feminist theories, Simone de Beauvoir, Judith Butler, Ellen Showalter. Then again, postmodernism, we'll talk about Baudrillard, Frederick Jameson, Habermas, eco-criticism. So we'll cover the whole gamut, and we'll try to go into as much detail as possible. But our focus is going to be always, and I'll also urge you to keep your focus at the previous year questions and how NET has questioned you, because you've already had enough time to study the text if you wanted to. You had the whole 3 years of your undergraduate course and 2 years of postgraduate course. So I assume that you know a little about the text, and even if you don't, I'll give you the broad overview, but then we'll go into straight into the questions, how they have asked questions, and we'll stick to how you can score the maximum amount of questions in the given time. Okay, so these are the, again there's one unit which is the English studies in India. We'll also cover that research methodologies part. I think a slide is missing, but we'll cover that. This is by there's a famous book you might have read, MP Sinha, I think, is the writer. So we'll take into account all those famous works which talk about the literary methodologies, that, let's say, close reading or textual analysis. We'll go into that, and how what are the literary methods of research. So in science you do quantitative analysis, you go interview method. In also social sciences department we also take some of those approaches, but we'll see how research is done in English departments. So this is the broad general overview of the syllabus. This is not everything, as I've already mentioned. We'll go into much detail, and we'll talk about all the major writers. And not just British writers, we'll talk about Australian, New Zealand, South Africa, Caribbean, all the writers, all their works, everything they've done, everything that can be thought of as literature, I'll teach you. Anything that can be termed literature, NET is going to ask you, I'm going to teach you. So everything is going to be covered. So I'll be signing off now. My name is Shivam Raj, and you are watching me on Study Capital YouTube platform, and we're going to be launching our classes very soon. So stick around, and we'll see you in classes soon. Thank you.